Welcome everyone for joining us today. Again, we're going to be talking about easing the storage management burden in the face of skill shortages. My name is Jen Lynn. I'm on the Cloudian team, and I will be your host. Joining us today is Randy Kerns. He's a chief strategist and analyst at the Evaluator group. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you.
And then we also have John Toor, Cloudian's very own CMO. Welcome for being here, John.
Thank you, Jen.
And then before we begin, I wanted to again point out to those that just joined that we'll be taking questions at the end of the webinar. So please enter those in via the questions tab at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I will kick it off with John.
All right. Hey, thanks very much, Jen, and thank you, Randy. It's a real pleasure to be talking with you today and talking about a subject that I feel really passionately about, which is how we can improve storage management using all the different technologies we have today. And what we're going to talk about specifically today is telemetry and how we can use that to make things easier, more reliable, and easier, more scalable. And really what this is addressing is, I think we hear from our customers. We've got about 700 enterprise customers with nearly 2 exabytes of data under management right now at Cloudian. And with the challenges we hear our customers talking about all the time are, the things that some of them are fairly typical. Data growth, that's been a challenge in the storage industry forever, and it continues to get more and more challenging. We continue to see 50% growth in unstructured data every year, and we've got customers managing massive environments. That are dealing with this every day. How do they scale? How do you create more space while maintaining ongoing operations? So that's one. Cloud integration is becoming an increasing challenge as the two worlds come together. We hear more and more about hybrid cloud, bringing together the cloud world and the on-prem world. But you don't want to create silos in that process. I think that's what we really want to avoid, is creating two worlds that are detached. We want the two worlds to be connected and jointly managed, so we can continue to scale the infrastructure, find information, and make better use of it. And then what I think the most recent challenge that people are facing is the skills shortage. And this is really one that has risen to the fore in the last 2 years. Finding the right skill set of managers that are experienced in managing storage, retaining them has become a real problem for a lot of shops. And frankly, we're hearing from our customers that this is becoming one of their limiters for growth in the on-prem environment, is simply, how do I find this and staff the people I need? How do I retain them so I can make sure that I've got reliable ongoing operations? So that's a challenge, which I think is really compelling, and is one we're going to address here in this webcast today. So, as I said, I feel really passionate that we've got some solutions to the problems around data growth, around cloud integration, around skill shortages, and specifically what we'll talk about today is how telemetry helps to address those. So, with that, I will turn it over to you, Randy, to launch us onto that topic.
All right. Well, thanks, John. One of the things that I think John's alluded to here is talking about this technology development that's really helping to address some of the storage management challenges. In my working with our IT clients, John's right. It's a pervasive issue, is having the right people, the talented people, even just enough bodies, if you will, to manage the environments and deal with things. So now we've had companies starting to work towards advancing a method of dealing with all of this. And this is where they're starting to get information from the systems that they have running and even from software that is sent to somewhere, and most of the time it's a SaaS-based application, to do some type of analytics on it. This is telemetry data. Now, the initial value in that was seen as looking at the underlying environment and try to predict when there's a failure and take some type of action such that there wasn't an interruption in service. And it's gotten certainly much greater than that, in that now it's become the source of information for monitoring what's going on. And a few vendors, and certainly Cloudian is one of them, you'll hear about later, have developed some really fantastic tools to get information we couldn't have had before. And this is also from a more traditional IT perspective is the SRM type of capabilities that we've had in the past were usually implemented using some software that's actually very heavy. It required a lot of maintenance for that, management of that. And now this becomes a source for a much simplified environment to see what's going on in my managing information. So this is really the foundation for improving the overall environment for managing my infrastructure and all my information. So if I can get this telemetry data and do analytics on it, then I can move towards really helping out this management burden. One of the things that's interesting is that we've seen a lot of offerings that bring in some experts when needed based on this telemetry data. And we call that proactive services by people who really understand the technology. And that can be particularly from the vendor who supplied it or somebody else on a subscription basis. The biggest benefit, and the one that we've seen overall, is a dramatic reduction in interruptions of service. Effectively saying that I'm going to have less time where I'm impacted, either an outage or more frequently some type of slowdown of some type. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what this really means. Big picture, this is what's going on. We're getting telemetry data that helps me understand the operation of my systems that I have. I'm going to get insights as to what's going on, and then I'll be able to apply some type of understanding, this visibility, to see what's happening. Drill downs, if you will, is the terminology we used to use, some way to isolate and get the necessary information to hopefully take some corrective action. And then the greatest business value is when I have some type of analytics to be able to transform all of this information, these insights, into some real actions. Now, certainly those of us who've been in the industry a long time understand I need data to operate on, I need measurement information to be able to manage something. That's certainly provided, but now I want to move beyond that and do more analytics to have things where I can describe what actions should be taken. So that's why this whole telemetry spectrum is feeding in real advance in technology for managing environment, protecting, providing availability, everything for information. And that's really the key point here.
So, Randy, you're speaking in kind of generalities. Is telemetry for storage something you're seeing as a trend in the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it's not just for storage. We're seeing it from server systems and from some applications. But the adoption or the interest primarily comes initially from storage, because making the information available for processing everything has the most dramatic value. And it's the one where people have had interruptions in the past. They say, I've got to make sure my data is always there, always available. Because for almost every environment we're in, that data or information is the most valuable thing they have. It's an asset, and making that available to process is a big deal.
Okay, so this isn't something that's storage specific. It applies to everything, but there are elements that can be applied directly to storage.
Correct, absolutely right. And we've seen the actual vendors that produce things for storage and managing storage and everything actually take the lead here more so than other organizations.
Good to hear.
All right, so we can move on here, and let's talk a little bit about this ability for scaling the management. One of the things that we run into, and still goes along with John's earlier statement about finding the right people, is the growth of information and the growth of the amount of infrastructure required to support it is a big deal. And how can you grow if you can't really manage it effectively? It becomes a business inhibitor. And certainly that's the last thing you want to be, is from an IT perspective, slowing down the opportunity for business just because you don't have the right people or have enough people. And so that's where we move into saying that this analysis then can break that bottleneck, if you will, and no longer be the excuse that we can't do something. So the idea is now we can take that information and make decisions, automate these responses, and move forward very quickly. This is where the hybrid cloud automation starts to come into play. Not only the on-prem, but working in the public cloud and say, these are the actions I need to take if this happens. Now, there are manual processes where you can monitor things, and that's great. That's what most of us are familiar with. But now we're getting more to the analytics turning into automated operations. And this is where this concept of AI ops, or artificial intelligence for IT operations, is coming into play. So AI ops fundamentally depends upon this telemetry data and then analytics on the data to make more intelligent operations. By doing that, I have less tasks that the specialists have to do, and they can then effectively automate a lot of this functionality. Now, unfortunately, the AI ops and automation are somewhat in conflict in that you're getting a lot of messaging about automation where that may be things where you pre-can some scripts and do things working with some other tools. And I find that most of our IT organizations are somewhat hesitant about that because that requires more development, more support. So the idea of this type of AI ops is where these things are done for the customer and they don't have to programmatically do things. Much more valuable to them, much more easier to introduce into their environments. Now, one of the other things, and this is a matter of scale, and we certainly see this in the environments that have both a large footprint in public clouds and on premises, is they look at, say, from the standpoint that I really can't handle all of this growth and this dissemination of information across these different environments. So there are companies now offering managed services for these customers. Certainly you'll see it from some of the vendors that support their products, and that's fabulous because they are the experts on the product. But the idea is that they're going to provide a much greater white glove treatment, if you will, of their systems, regardless of where it's at. So now all of a sudden you can get the best management and resiliency, everything to do with that platform from them. This is very valuable. This certainly does alleviate some of the personnel requirements you have and the limited skill sets, et cetera. That's quite different. And this hard-earned knowledge, and I typically talk about this, is that you have some stars here. These are the people that are really almost artists in managing information. It's difficult to obtain. It comes at a price for time, and only a few people really focus on doing that. It's hard to keep those people, and they're rare. And so using some of these globally managed services help address those as well. Now let's talk about the cloud scale. This is probably one of the more interesting things in that IT operations are really looking at saying, okay, we've got to scale our operations much, much larger. There's lots of reasons for it. You know, organic growth is certainly one of them, acquisitions. Some of the things I've run into a great deal, and especially in the financial sector, has to do with independent operations that started up in multiple clouds, and then they come back to be centralized again, especially some new development things from DevOps teams aren't necessarily done with the cognizance of production environments. And so now they brought in together, how can I scale and do all of that? So this is what we end up calling cloud scale storage management, if you will. And it's really a real-time requirement for managing things for IT operations. The big thing about this managed services that can go and deal with cloud scale, again, it doesn't bottleneck the growth of the organization. It does address the staffing, but the big thing is, and this is the common refrain is, I don't depend upon that very specialized person that is so hard to find. And the best comment I get is the one in quotes on this slide is from our clients. Says, it just happens. I don't need to worry about it. And the fact it just happens is the result of a whole lot of development work behind that. But it just happens to the point where now they don't need those specialized people, or at least as many of them. And it really can simplify not only the operations, but their strategy in going forward about how to deploy, how to bring in new business owners, projects, et cetera. That simplification of planning changes the delivery cycle to something much more agreeable with the business operations. An amazing number of times I go in and work with clients and they say, it takes this long to do things. And of course, that's unacceptable to the business owners. And so we end up spending time saying, how can we simplify this to make it easier? So this all fits under this umbrella of cloud scale storage management. And this is where the analytics and the visibility come into play to say, I don't need to be required to go to that detail and have that detailed understanding of these people. I can now see things at a much higher level and manage them more effectively.
Right. Yeah, I think your points around cloud scale are really, really critical. Can you expand on why that scale is so important to solving this problem?
Yeah, probably the biggest thing is it's perceived to be an impediment to business, and quite frankly, IT people have been perceived to be a burden to the business for a long time, which is unfortunate, and that goes back decades. I think we've all lived that, and to the point at which a lot of business owners look for alternatives and go into their IT group to get things done, and that ends up creating almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they bring that back inside of IT when they realize, hey, my information needs to be protected. Hey, it needs to be secured. Hey, I need to make sure it's always running. And so they end up going back to the people who have the expertise to do that. And they're the very people they tried to avoid in the first place. And so this cloud scale becomes a big deal, and simplifying it, making it such that you don't have to be the bad guy, if you will, in doing that, it is really something. So the growth now, accommodating growth, has to be something that IT people, and this goes, from the lowest level all the way up through the CIO and the CISO, have to be saying, we can make this happen. We can do this. If it's ever we have to do this, or we have to hire this many more people, anything that is a pushback is a reinforcement, if you will, of the perception that organizations have, is that they are blocking our business, they're blocking our growth, and that can't happen. So this is why it is such a big deal.
Right. Yeah, and I think cloud scale is a really good term there, because it implies a physical thing, a size, but it also implies a simplicity of management, right? And it implies a way of doing things that people are now becoming accustomed to in their cloud world, and they expect the same thing out of all of their IT.
A perfect way to describe it. When we started talking about doing things the cloud scale way or whatever, it was all about changing the way services are delivered. So no longer do you have to talk to an IT guy, et cetera, et cetera. It's all self-directed and everything. But it's a lot more gone way beyond that now. And John, you're absolutely right. That's what cloud scale is.
Yeah. So, and I think that kind of speaks to the point on this slide is that this world of having things be truly distributed changes how we manage things. Cloud. It used to be that you could kind of get away with having storage silos, and maybe it wasn't the most elegant solution, but it worked and it was relatively simple. But now people know with the cloud that you can have a fully distributed system, with data that's available anywhere within a unified environment. So the old, being able to get away with storage silos is gone. And what's interesting from our perspective is that this creates a different set of requirements on management. If you look at our system, Cloudian, we are cloud-like in that data can be located anywhere, but remain within a single namespace. So a single namespace gives you the ability to access data from any location, and it's completely invisible to you where that data is coming from, just as it would be in the cloud. So you could be sitting in London accessing information from a local Cloudian cluster, and in reality, that data is located in Los Angeles, and you'll have no knowledge that that data is coming from around the globe. And in fact, when you're managing that data, it's the same thing. You have the ability to put data where you want it if you like, or you can have that data be distributed. It's all one system. That's the point. And what's really exciting about that from a management perspective is that creates something that's cloud-like, cloud scale, as you said, Randy. But it also creates something which is, it's very simple, right? It's one environment. The downside, and I would say, where it adds complexity, is now all that infrastructure becomes part of the system. So the LAN WAN interconnects, all the different servers you're running on, all the different configuration settings across all the different Cloudian nodes, all require monitoring and management, right? If everything is working great, your system is going to work flawlessly. But when something goes wrong, you want to be able to find that issue quickly rather than having to do a bunch of troubleshooting. You want to be able to pinpoint where that issue lies quickly and be able to ferret out the problem and solve it. That is the challenge we were facing in terms of managing a large scale cluster. And that's exactly why we created this tool. So, when you talk about telemetry, Randy, the way we think of it is in terms of identifying issues and resolving them before they become something that impacts the overall operation of the system. And because the system is large and complex, it requires a special tool to be able to go do that. So in our parlance, telemetry is what we call hyper IQ, observability and analytics software. And we created this specifically to manage these large scale systems and make it easy for IT managers to go in and identify where problems lie quickly, pinpoint that problem, and implement a corrective action before it grows into something that actually becomes something that impedes operations. So visibility into infrastructure, real-time dashboards, and historical data. Why historical data? Well, because it's easy to look at a graph and identify a change. Right? It's hard to look at a single measurement and say, oh, that's a problem. It's easy to look at something that's a collection in time and see something changing and say, that there's something changing in my environment I need to be concerned about. So we present all this graphically through a variety of panes, which you see here on the screen, which are all configurable to your particular environment. So people have obviously vastly different configurations. We've got customers with as many as 80 or 90 Cloudian nodes operating globally. That can be a very different thing than operating across 2 data centers with 6 nodes. So it's configurable depending on how your configuration requires. But what this really lets you do is, if a predictive maintenance, as I said, go in and spot trends, see where things are changing and you need to address them. A third point, which is not necessarily related to management, but is equally critical to IT operations, is user behavior. Who's using what data? Who's accessing data that maybe shouldn't be? If you've got a folder or a collection of information, what is supposed to be accessed by a certain group of users, if you see a different set of people accessing that data, something is wrong, right? Somewhere a security exposure has been created. And that's an equally compelling issue for IT, is making sure that everything is set for compliance. Configuration settings aren't always accurate. How do you spot that problem? Well, if you see people accessing data that shouldn't be accessing it, that's a really good sign. You need to go in and check those configuration settings. So these are the things we were looking to accomplish. And this is when we say telemetry, we mean going in and looking at the networks, looking at the servers that your software is running on, looking at the configuration of the Cloudian itself, and identifying where all the issues could potentially lie. The second part of this, Randy, is that I think addressing the skill shortage piece of this, because this tool, Hypercare, was created for Cloudian to manage our environments, or for the users to manage our environments. It's also equally applicable for us as a support organization to manage the environment. So we have added services that essentially allow us to do it for you if you like, right? We can use the same tool, the same Hyper IQ tool to visualize everything that's going on in the environment. And we can then essentially go in and manage the operations for you if you like, right? So we offer the option of a completely lights out cloud-like management environment where essentially we're using Hyper IQ to monitor the environment. We're identifying issues, going in and taking corrective action. Also, performing routine maintenance, such as software updates. So we can do all that for you. In some organizations, that's not a step they're wanting to go to, but they still want to have that level of guidance. We still want you to monitor it and tell us what's going on. We just don't want you to touch, any configuration settings or do anything for us. And that's what the second level of service is called Premier. That's what that's all about, is providing that same level of monitoring and analysis, but advising you on what steps to take to configure your system for your needs. So Hypercare, we do it for you. Premier, we guide you at every step. But these are examples of using this telemetry, this Hyper IQ management environment in our own support organization to provide, a level of support and guidance, and thereby completely alleviating the issues around skills shortages. So I think we've seen that, there's a telemetry option within the Cloudian environment that gives you that kind of capability to really make the scale problem much more manageable, right? Because now we've got a tool that can go globally. And we've addressed the skills shortages issue with either a lights out management environment where we do it for you, or the Premier where we guide you at every step. Either way, you've got some options that give you capabilities that I think make a global cloud-like management environment something accessible to any organization, regardless of their staffing levels.